right, welcome back to the Know Your Numbers REI podcast. This is your host, Chris McCormack, and I'm honored to be here with you today. It's an exciting episode. As you all know, here in the United States, we have a very hot presidential election coming up, and I feel inclined to bring you this episode in preparation for that. There are a wide variety of topics being discussed in this presidential election, and not the least of which is tax policy. There is a lot of talk about tax policy. One candidate saying one thing, another candidate saying another thing, some of them overlapping. So today we're going to be focusing on one candidate in particular, in current Vice President Kamala Harris and presidential candidate on the Democratic side, Kamala Harris, for this episode, mainly because there's a lot going on behind the scenes around her tax policy, and also because there are nonpartisan resources that you can actually access to see what they believe to be the impact of such a tax policy. And it was actually a topic of the vice president debate, is experts and what to do about some of the expert projections. I think Governor Walz brought it up in that they projected that President Trump's economic policy would actually hurt the economy, and Vice President nominee J.D. Vance talked about how they aren't able to be trusted. And it was a topic of conversation, but this topic of conversation will relate to Kamala Harris's tax policy because it didn't get touched upon, and there are some big questions about it. And for those of you that want to do a little deeper dive, you can go to the taxfoundation.org, and that is where you can find the independent resource and the deep dive into some of these proposals that Vice President Harris is making. Now, before we get to the topic, I would like to preface by saying that this is a ad-free podcast. We don't promote it in any way. We don't make any money off of the podcast currently, and we'd love to keep it that way. But in order to do that, we need to keep having listeners and eyes come to the podcast. So if you get any sort of value out of this podcast, maybe you agree or disagree, it will be a podcast that I would love to hear some feedback. I would also like for it to reach the masses. I'd love to have you share it with a friend. Maybe they agree with you on politics, maybe they disagree with you on politics, but taxes are something that we should all be considering when we go into the voting booths in less than a month, really. So today we're going to be talking about the tax policy that Kamala Harris has proposed. And the big takeaway that I have when looking at this is that it is a proposal for higher taxes aimed at businesses and high income earners. And if you are familiar with the political landscape, the Democratic side is traditionally, we're going to tax the rich, give to the poor, almost like a Robin Hood mentality. And it meets a lot of people's desires. It reaches a certain segment of the population. Now, whether that actually works in theory is a whole nother story. There's a lot of research out there about how some of the low income areas that receive a lot of the government help, a lot of the governmental need that is given, whether it's single moms in inner cities, whether it's people under the pay line and they receive a certain stipend, whether it's unemployment compensation. Their research shows that the governmental handouts that these people get doesn't actually help them materially. They might get it, but it's not helping the actual problem at hand. You can't bottle it up into one problem, but there's a whole host of different problems. Many people would argue that a big problem that inner cities have is a lack of father figure. And so if you incentivize single moms by saying, hey, if you're a single mom raising kids, we're going to give you a certain amount of dollars every month, every year, so that you can support these kids. Well, it gives less of an incentive to actually unite the family and have the father involved, because now the government is taking the role of the father. And so when you look at this idea of higher taxes on businesses and high income earners so that you can take that money and deploy it in these lower income households, that sounds good in theory, but whether it actually works is a whole nother story. And we need to be getting to the crux of the issues. It breaks my heart that people are in low income areas and they feel like their situation is inescapable and they're going to be stuck in it for the rest of their lives. And I believe, and you can disagree with me here, but I believe that when they are receiving a certain amount of government handouts, it only boosts the type of behavior that keeps them in there. It's like giving an alcoholic, always drinking around an alcoholic and expecting them to change their behavior when you come around them and bring the 30 pack of beers or the bottle of wine or the bottle of vodka. You are an instigator, if you will. And there's a better word to describe it, but enabling. You are enabling the bad behavior when you go to an alcoholic and say, hey man, you need to get clean, but also come hang out with us. We're going to the bar. You don't have to drink, but like, let's get some food and hang out with people. Everybody else is going to be drinking, but hey, you got a problem, so don't touch the booze, right? It's like the same thing can be said to the patterns that have proven themselves to be detrimental to certain segments of the population. Growing up in a fatherless home is going to increase the crime rates, increase the teen pregnancy, increase the high school dropout rates. All of this can be proven by statistics and data. But if we say, hey, we're just going to throw money at the problem and pretend like we're doing something, that only enables the issue, right? And so we want to actually try to think about what's going to solve the problem. Is it going to be higher taxes on businesses and high income earners and giving that money to the low income houses, the areas that seem like they need it the most? And I'm, again, all for helping people, but I think it should be done in a different way, right? It should be getting to the problem and not just one of the attributes of the problem, which is poverty. And so again, bringing this back to the topic of conversation, breaking down Kamala Harris's tax plan, one of her biggest ideas is to tax the big businesses, tax the high income earners, which if you're an entrepreneur, if you're a real estate investor, if you're a high income W-2 earner, that is you. You have to look out. You have to beware. And now the lion's share of this will go to people that might not listen to this podcast, the mega millionaires, if you will, the billionaires. And for them, it's even a greater problem because she's talking about taxing unrealized gains. So imagine if you had a stock portfolio that went up in value over the next year. She would say, okay, you have a certain amount in your portfolio. We're going to take a certain amount in taxes. You can keep the rest. But even though you're not able to use that money, we're going to take it because you had an increase in your stock portfolio. And now that proposal is for certain income levels, certain wealth levels, which probably doesn't meet a lot of the people that are listening to this now. I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but I want to say it was somewhere around $400 million. If your net worth is around that much, then they're going to talk about taxing the unrealized capital gains. But if they can do it for them, who's going to stop them from doing it to you, who might be a high income earner in their eyes, right? Maybe you're making $500,000 a year, you have a decent stock portfolio, but hey, Baxter down in downtown Minneapolis needs some money to get out of his problems, and we don't know what else to do other than take your money and give it to him so that he can go and spend it and do what he needs to do to satisfy himself for today. And that's not to disregard the people in downtown Minneapolis. That's where we are. I think a great resource for them would be churches and people in the Christian organization who have the solution to all of life's problems, and that is Jesus Christ and his Holy Spirit, right? Because of the sinfulness of mankind, because of the brokenness of humanity, you do see poverty, you do see people getting addicted to drugs, having sex out of wedlock, getting involved in teen pregnancies, getting in abusive relationships, and that the lion's share of those problems find themselves in these impoverished areas, and it's a travesty. But is the solution taking money from taxpayer A, who's making $500,000 a year, and giving it to Group B, who's down in downtown Minneapolis and doesn't have fathers and hasn't been educated properly and are not doing certain patterns or habits that will benefit them for the long haul? Is the solution money? It rarely is. And so Kamala Harris's tax plan does look to do that. And I think it gets at a emotional need of ours, is to eradicate some of these broken parts of our lives and of our world. It sounds good in theory. The rich have enough of money for themselves, and now it's time to give to the poor. It meets the emotional desire that we have as humans to help our neighbor, but it doesn't do it in a way that will solve the problem. And you can go back and look at the data. One great book that I read that kind of unpacks a lot of this is Wealth and Poverty by George Gilder. It talks about a lot of the issues that we might be covering, especially in a Kamala Harris tax plan, but it also talks about how we're looking to solve problems with money that don't have a monetary solution. And we need to get to the crux of the issue, which really deals with the character and the way that we hold ourselves, right? And that's why fathers are so important, is because it's proven that fathers will build character in the home. And so you do see a large amount of people who don't have present fathers, or maybe even just a divided household. Those families, when it comes to the material success of people, they are getting started on the wrong foot. And a lot of the problem can be summed up in something like fatherhood. So that's a long-winded way of getting to the starting point of this conversation, which is the bulk of Kamala Harris's tax plan can be summed up in high taxes for businesses and high income earners, so that they can then go and grow the welfare state of our country and give it to people who they deem to be in greater need of these issues. And here's a quote from the article from Tax Foundation. It says, on a gross basis, we estimate that Vice President Kamala Harris's proposal would increase taxes by about $4.1 trillion from 2025 to 2034. They also say that it would reduce long-run GDP by 2%, wages by 1.2%, and employment by 786,000 people. None of that sounds good. And again, these are estimates, but these are the experts that Tim Walz talked about in his take in the vice president debate. And if you watch that, you saw JD Vance point to the experience that people had under President Trump's leadership, where take-home pay was at a higher level than ever before in his lifetime. So over the past 40 years, right? Take-home pay was greater. The taxes were lower. Affordability of houses was much more reasonable. And all of this has gone away. And if it remains the way that Kamala Harris has proposed, it will continue to go away because we will see less employment, we will see lower wages, and we will see lower GDP, which is the economic health of our country. And we're going to see increased taxes by about $4.1 trillion. So also another thing that people say is that because of the debt that we have in the United States, which is bananas, we have, I think it's like $37 trillion worth of debt, which is astronomical and scary and has just multiplied on itself over the past 40 years. People say that in order to handle that debt, we need to increase taxes. And again, it sounds like it's getting to the solution, but Tax Foundation says, okay, it's going to increase taxes, but it's going to reduce long-run GDP by 2%. It's going to reduce wages by 1.2%, and it's going to reduce employment by 786,000. Because when you increase taxes on businesses, when you increase taxes on high-income earners, the data will show that they are less likely to produce at a level that they could produce at if they know that more of that profit is going into their business and being reinvested in their employees and being reinvested in their research and development, right? If we just say, hey, big business A, we're going to be taxing you $2.1 trillion next year. You're going to pay that to us unless you don't make the same amount of money. Well, why would they want to make the same amount of money, right? And this, again, can be proven. And you can do your own research. Wealth and Poverty by George Gilder is a great resource. There's another economist, Thomas Sowell, does a lot of great research. I actually haven't read many of his books, but he is a resource that I am looking to and will continue to look to as we think about the economy and how we're going to do. But the idea is that the tax policies that Kamala Harris is proposing will raise your taxes. Corporate and individual taxes. This is another part of the article. Corporate and individual taxes would be among the highest in the developed world. So we would have higher tax rates and higher tax levels than most, if not all, of the developed world. That is an insane idea. And I can't say whether this is picture perfect, but again, this is an independent, nonpartisan research center, Tax Foundation. You can find this research, and I believe they did one on Donald Trump's tax policy as well. But tax policy would raise taxes, and we would have the highest taxes among the developed world. And again, you can explain this and make it sound pretty good in that it would raise taxes and we'd be able to pay down the debt. But hey, the government is not spending any less money, even though that debt continues to increase, and they use it as a talking point, right? The spending has only increased as far as I know. They're pouring money into different countries and wars and areas that doesn't actually go to, hey, we have this debt bubble that we need to take care of, but hey, instead they're paying it out to other countries and looking at solving other people's issues rather than solving the issues here on the homeland. But that is a general statement, right? I've talked a little bit about the overview of this proposal, but here are some of the ideas that the specific ideas that are included in it. Increase corporate income tax from 21% to 28%. So Donald Trump in his Tax Cut and Jobs Act decreased the corporate income tax rate from 39% down to 21%. Kamala Harris says that she'll now increase that to 28%. So if you're a C corporation, if you have a management company taxed as a C corporation, which many of our clients do, you would, instead of paying only 21% of your income, you would now pay 28% of your income to taxes, federal taxes. So that is a pretty big increase, right? If I make $100,000 and I have a C corporation, right now $21,000 is being paid to taxes. Under Kamala Harris's plan, it's $28,000, $7,000 difference. You can buy a good used car for that amount. You can max out your HSA for that amount. You can max out a Roth IRA for that amount. You can do a lot of stuff with $7,000, but they're saying it's going to be going to the US government under Kamala Harris's tax plan. And now Donald Trump, he actually did an interview with Dave Ramsey, and he talked about the corporate income tax rate. He talked about how in his presidency, they were able to decrease it from 39% to 21%. And with Dave Ramsey, he even said they want to get it lower. I think he might have said, I believe I saw 20%, but he talked about even 15%. And so he is, because of his experience as a real estate investor, as a business owner, he knows that when you're not shelling out thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars to the US government. You're likely going to be reinvesting that in your business so you can continue to grow your business. It's a desire of humanity, mankind, is to grow and to multiply, right? If you're a believer and you read the Bible, the first command God gave us was to be fruitful and multiply. It is a good thing to want to multiply. And so Donald Trump's tax policy looks to do that. It looks to increase the likelihood of multiplication for the business owners, and Kamala Harris's does the opposite. Kamala Harris has proposed an increase of the corporate alternative minimum tax from 15 to 21%. So this is a little known tax that gets into some of our higher income earners. So people making more than $400,000 usually have to pay this alternative minimum tax. I believe it came into effect under Barack Obama. And again, it just has to do with taxing people in a variety of ways so that they can take that money and quote unquote give it to those who need it more, even though that is hard-earned money for those high income earners, right? High income earners, business owners, you guys work hard for that money. And for them to want to increase the corporate income tax rate from 21 to 28%, and then the corporate alternative minimum tax rate from 15 to 21%, that's a 7% increase on the corporate income tax rate and a 6% increase on the alternative minimum tax rate. And the two of those combined is 13%, man. That is not a small amount. And that is what's going to happen under the current proposal that Kamala Harris has put out. Quadruple stock buyback tax from 1 to 4%. So you see a trend. It's all about increasing the taxes. Increase net investment income tax to 5%. Increase top individual tax rate to 39.6%. Now this one is pretty crazy. So increase top individual income tax rate to 39.6% at $400,000 if you're single and $450,000 if you're married filing joint. Now, if you're married filing joint, you usually have a 2x buffer between the single high tax bracket and your tax bracket, right? So say, just for illustration purposes, say the 0 to 100,000 is the 10% tax bracket for single folks. That same logic, they would say 0 to 200,000 is the 10% tax bracket for married filing joint. Now, under Kamala Harris's tax proposal, it'd be 39.6%, $400,000 at the $400,000 level if you're single, $450,000 if you're married filing joint. So they're decreasing the tax benefit of being married and filing joint, and they're increasing that tax rate. Right now it's at 37%. Again, a benefit that came from Donald Trump's first round of presidency is he decreased the individual tax rates. And that's another thing here, is that the proposal says nothing about the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. So real estate investors, the qualified opportunity zones, the bonus depreciation, the decreased tax brackets that we currently have under current law because of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that was passed in 2017, they're set to expire in 2025. If you look at the calendar, that's next year. So after the end of next year, if nothing else happens, you guys will automatically bump up to the higher tax brackets that we had pre-Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and things like opportunity zones are likely out the window. Other benefits, the bonus depreciation is completely phased out at that point, and there's a few QBI deduction, which helps a lot of our business owners, no longer there. Kamala Harris does nothing. She doesn't propose anything for that. Donald Trump is going to obviously look to help to expand that because he's seen the benefit. From 2017 up until 2020, right before COVID hit, there was substantial economic growth. Obviously, COVID threw it for a wrench, and it was tough to recover from that. But the economic policies that President Trump put into place starting in 2017 and going through 2019 and early 2020, there was large amount of economic growth. And as JD Vance pointed out in the vice presidential debate, larger take-home pay, houses were more affordable, taxes were lower. And all of this is stuff that stimulates the economy. It doesn't just make your pockets bigger, but the research and data shows that you're going to actually reinvest that into the economy. And so our economy, and there's even data that shows that tax revenues increase when taxes are lower because of that, right? Because people are making more money. So even though the rates are lower, they're making so much more money that they are going to be paying a larger dollar amount, but it's less harmful on their financial security because it's a lower percentage of their income. Kamala Harris goes on to want to increase capital gains tax from 20 to 28%. So I've even heard that she would boost it up to the ordinary income tax rates. So currently, if you sell a real estate property and you don't do any tax planning, and say your gain is $500,000, 20% of that, so $100,000 would go to taxes. She increases that to 28%, and now that is $140,000. So you have $40,000 that you would be keeping that she is now taxing. So you can see that, and talk about capital gains. Another piece is that the 1031 exchange would be limited to $500,000 worth of gains. So if you have a property that you've held for 20 years and it's in a largely profitable area and it's gone up in value, so much so that you have a capital gain of $1 million, $500,000 is you can use for 1031 exchange. The other $500,000, pay taxes on it. Right now, you can 1031 the whole thing and do that until you die. She's going to change that. And that has been around for so long. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but that has been around for at least 50 years. I would say almost 70 years, and if not more than that. What I want you guys to gain, okay? So we started this by talking about how it's higher taxes for individuals and businesses. That sounds good in theory because, hey, yeah, they're making so much money. Let's take their money and give it to somebody who needs it more, right? But it disincentivizes good character. It disincentivizes hard work. It disincentivizes reinvestment. It disincentivizes profit, which is actually a good thing. Instead, you're going to increase taxes and pay it to somebody who might not be working hard because, hey, the government is going to increase my unemployment pay. Hey, I am getting disability benefits because I broke my leg and now I don't have to go back to work, right? If you incentivize a low work ethic, people are going to have a low work ethic, and that destroys our culture. It destroys our country. And so high taxes, while they might sound good in theory, they will actually hurt us in the long run for many reasons. You will be poorer, but also the character of our country, the spirit of our country will decrease because we are no longer working hard. We are no longer reinvesting. We are no longer multiplying. Instead, we're staying stagnant. And if you're not growing, you're slowing. And so if you're staying stagnant, it hurts the overall welfare of our country. So the biggest thing, and you can go look at this, but her proposal will increase taxes by about $4.1 trillion from 2025 to 2034. She says nothing about the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. It's going to reduce long-run GDP by 2%, reduce wages by 1.2%, and reduce employment by 786,000 people. She does not like corporations or high-income earners. And therefore, she's going to be going after those people so that she can help those who tend to vote for her, which is people in the densely populated cities making a low wage and looking for government handouts. And I don't mean to demean them, but it is true. The large amount of voters that vote for somebody like Kamala Harris or the Democratic Party who looks to benefit them by promising welfare checks and unemployment and many of these other incentives that they're pushing that they're going to do with these increased taxes. The majority of those voters come from densely populated cities. Densely populated cities tend to go blue and tend to like these ideas. But for you that are out there, the real estate investor, the business owner, the entrepreneur, the high income earner, I plead with you to go and do your research and vote accordingly. High taxes do not help us. And it actually, as the nonpartisan independent research foundation, that is taxfoundation.org, shows, it will actually hurt the economy over the next 10 years. And that's not what we need, especially when our debt is where it is. So this has been the Know Your Numbers REI podcast. It has been a recap of Kamala Harris's tax plan. Elections are coming up here next month. Please do us all a favor, do the next generation a favor, and vote according to the policies that are going to be best for our country. Until next time, God bless you and keep moving forward.